Have you ever loaded your Wix website and wondered why it was a little faster the second time than the first time? Welcome back to the Wix Wiz. I'm Aton, and today we're going to be talking all about caching, the caching that is built into your Wix website out of the box, as well as the ability to manually control caching for different pages, and even deep dive into more advanced dev topics such as caching in our backend web method. So if you want to really take a deep dive into caching and potentially learn how to speed up and improve your site's performance a little bit, then let's get started. Today, I actually want to start in the documentation, and that's because caching is a wide but also quite nuanced topic, and I really want to understand the things as they're written and make sure that we cover all the details. The background for this tutorial is one, the fact that there's now caching available in web methods. So that's something that we're going to talk about when we get to that point. But in order to really understand caching in web methods, I think it's also important to understand caching in Wix in general. And also, people who aren't using code will gain a lot of value out of the general understanding of caching and how it can be possibly used to speed up their site, or at least what's happening in the background when their site is loading. So I'm reading here out of the developer documentation, but we're going to hop through a couple different articles because Wix touches on it in a couple different places. I'll also share a little kind of insider knowledge that I was told that the approach to caching being on by default when you're in dev mode might be changing or has changed recently. We can discuss that a little bit more when we get to it and see it live. But that's also something to note that this is really an evolving topic. So what you read today might not be true in a few months, so just make sure to keep updated. So let's go ahead and start this article about caching. So caching is a method used to temporarily store data in a storage location on Wix's infrastructure. So this is an important note that the cached data does not exist. It's not being cached locally on your device. It's being cached on the Wix servers. With caching, you can keep frequently accessed content readily available, reducing the time it takes to retrieve information on your site and enhancing user experience. It's important to manage caching effectively to prevent site visitors from seeing outdated or incorrect content. So, what is caching? Okay, maybe I should have explained this a little easier, but if you haven't managed to pick up from this general intro, caching is essentially storing the result of a page loading in this context, or storing some data that has been requested by a visitor, so that instead of retrieving that information or that page the long way by needing to reconstruct it every time that somebody requests it, it's essentially storing, Wix is essentially storing, and generally the concept of caching is to store the end result of that request, whether it's a page of your site or data or whatnot, and to deliver that directly, thus shortening the amount of time that it takes for stuff to get from a server to your user. So, for example, a page, when it loads, it has HTML, but it might also have some JavaScript, which generates some HTML, and that is something that can take some time. So, what Wix does is it renders the page on the server first. So, it runs the JavaScript and creates a document essentially of how the page is supposed to look in its end game, and then it sends it over to the user. So instead of doing that whole process every time when a user requests a certain page, essentially it just sends it the end game HTML from the cache. Okay, so it doesn't have, it essentially should take less time. An example from a data query might be that a user requests certain data from a CMS. Let's say you're requesting 10 items that match a certain field or something like that. So Wix will have to then go into your database, get the search for those items, create a JSON, send it back over, populate the data, etc. So instead of going through that whole process, instead what happens is that Wix can identify, okay, this is the same exact request. So somebody's requesting, 10 items that match this filter. So instead of going and looking in the database, I could just send them the JSON that I already have. Because we already found the result to that question already. We don't need to go searching in the library again. If I draw a parallel, instead of going and looking for each individual book, we already have like a pile of books ready that we can just give you. So that is caching in general. It might seem dandy. It's important to note that this can also potentially have downsides because it means that your data or the pages might not always be up to date, right? Because instead of actually going and getting the actual page or data, we're just giving something from memory. Okay, I remember that this is what they probably want when they're requesting this thing. And so there's always kind of a balancing act of how to also provide fresh data, but also give people the fastest loading times. And we're going to touch on that more when we see some practical examples here. So let's dive in and talk a little bit more specifically about page caching, just like an overview of what we're going to be doing today. So we're talking about page caching. We'll touch briefly on data caching, just as kind of like a side note. We're going to focus a lot on web method caching. We're not going to touch on router caching at the moment because I think that that's a rather niche topic. Most people are not using routers on their site. So really just these three. So page caching, web method caching, and data caching. That's what we're going to be touching on today. So let's hop into data caching. And also, while we're reading this documentation, we'll see some examples on a site of what that caching looks like in the wild. About page caching. So when a page on your site is requested for the first time, Wix caches the rendered page on a content delivery network. So when somebody loads one of the pages of your site, Wix essentially caches at that point. So that means the first user that's going to be loading your site, later on in the docs, it also mentions that this is after publish. So whenever you publish, you're essentially invalidating the cache. We'll talk about what invalidating the cache is as well. But basically, right after you publish your site, the first time that somebody loads the site, it will not hit the cache. So it'll take them essentially longer to load. And then all other users after that load the site should be hitting the cache. Okay, so they should be getting the pre-rendered version, and then it should come a little quicker. Wix allows you to manage this and disable caching for your sites. However, the more pages on your site that are cached, the faster the overall experience is for your visitors. So I think this is a good point for a demo. Let's go over here to this Wix website. It's a classic editor site, and it's 95% off of a template that Wix provides. The only thing I did here is I added in this about page because I wanted to have an extra page on the site, whereas this was kind of built as a one-pager to begin with. And let's go ahead and I'm going to publish the site. So I'm going to go ahead and publish. And here I have the site open already in the browser. And I've opened up my developer tools over here. And I went to the network tab and I added in this server timing header, which I know exists thanks to a call that I had with the head of performance at Wix, Alon, who was very helpful in highlighting some of these aspects of caching within the wider context of understanding performance in Wix. That's how this won't be there by default. If you're using just kind of the network tab out of the box, you kind of have to know that this header exists, I feel. You can add it in, by the way, just by right-clicking over here, and you can add in extra response headers and then manage header columns, and you can add a custom header. That's how I did this. So that's how I have this server timing over here. And this is what is going to help us understand if we hit the cache or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reload this page. And here, you can ignore the name here at caching. That's just because what I decided to name my site. That might be a bit confusing. So we have here a GET request where Wix is essentially getting our site. So this is the document. This is the HTML and status 200. We managed to get it. And we have some interesting information over here. So we have DOM content loaded, 3 seconds. It's a little longer than it was taking before. It was taking me like 1.5 seconds before. Maybe it's because I added the extra page to the site. But we could see here that essentially the cache, you could see here it says cache description miss. So that means we did not hit the cache. And that's because we just published our site. So we published our site, no cache. And then if I go here and I load this page again, then you can see here that the DOM content was loaded in 835 milliseconds. So much, much faster, almost less than a third of the time it took to load the first time. And you can see here that the description of the cache is hit. So we hit the cache. So this time we were loading the document from the cache, so it went a lot quicker. One interesting thing to note is the relationship between different pages on the site. So you'll notice that when I load the home page and then I navigate to the About page, which is a different page on the site, so we actually don't download a new document, and that has to do with how Wix is working as an SPA, a single page application, if I'm not mistaken. And so essentially, when we first downloaded the document, essentially when you visit your first page on Wix, that should be generally downloading the other pages as well. So you can see here that no new pages were downloaded here. We didn't see any changes here in the network. But if I go ahead and I hit refresh here on this About page, then it does fetch specifically the About page, and the cache is a miss. Okay, so even if so it's an interesting, I don't know if it's ironic, but we load the home page, which technically does load the About page because we can navigate to it, but that doesn't create a cache for somebody who's visiting the About page for the first time. So here where there's a miss on the cache, it still loaded pretty quickly, probably because this is like a less heavy page than the home page, or just luck. And if I go ahead and hit refresh now, then we do have a hit on the cache, and we also see an improvement in the time that it takes to load. I see now that my head is blocking here the loading time, which is unfortunate, so you'll just have to trust me. Let's see if I can get you to see that. Yeah, so here, that's the loading time over there. Okay, so that is kind of like a brief insight into caching, and this is caching out of the box. So this is just a plain Wix website. I didn't make any changes. I didn't activate dev mode. So really just the basics of the basics of caching out of the box. Back to the documentation now. So we have a note here. Important, all pages on your site are cached automatically, except for those accessed by logged in members. If a visitor is logged into your site, any page they open isn't cached and is always rendered from scratch. So this is an important note because the implication of this is essentially that if you're using membership on your site and somebody is logged in, your site performance will generally be slower than if it's just a visitor visiting your site and you don't really have much control about that. We'll talk about the web methods and stuff, which will give you some level of control over caching when it comes to custom code, but it is not possible to enable caching for logged in member sessions. And that's quite unfortunate because I think that a lot of people use membership on their site to some extent. And that just means that, at least from the point that the visitor is logged in, they'll be generally getting a slower site experience. I'm sure there's a reason behind it. Probably has to do with the fact that when you're a member, a lot of your experiences on the site are customized to some extent. So certain things are rendered in a way that is appropriate for a specific member. And that might add some certain complications to caching and whatnot, which is probably why it's not possible. But it is an important thing to note if you're noticing like a difference in performance of your site when you're logged in and when you're not logged in. So that could be one of the reasons. Supported IDEs. So this is from a developer perspective. By the way, if this gets a little complicated at some point, there's also like a non-dev article about site caching. So part of like the general Wix Help Center, which explains some of these things as well. It still has some technical concepts, but it's an article that is written for a different audience. So people who are building sites possibly without dev background or dev interests. So you can see here some instructions here as well, which we'll get here to in the in this page, if I'm not mistaken. Control, yeah, it would be control page caching manually. That was the next article that we're going to talk about. So let's just see over here. So cache invalidation. By default, page caches are cleared or invalidated after 1 week. Okay, so that means that I don't know how this would work if you have people constantly visiting your site uh, and like constantly loading the page again and again. It could be it measures from the first time it was cached, and then a week later it'll invalidate no matter what. And then the first person to visit after a week will get the non-cache. It's not 100% clear here, but generally that's the lifespan of the cache. So it's not forever, and that has to do with that balance that I mentioned in terms of trying to keep data fresh and your pages fresh versus trying to make them as quick as possible. Additionally, page caches are automatically invalidated whenever you publish your site. So like just to go back to our demo over here, so if I go and I hit publish, and then I go back to this live site, and then let's say, reload the About page again. So we see here that we have cache miss again, even though we hit the cache last time, and that's because I went ahead and I published my site. For example, additionally, invalidate page site, or when application data changes. For example, if you update the product catalog in the Stores app, the page cache is cleared, and the page is then recached the next time a site visitor requests the page. So there are certain things, actions. It's probably impossible to list them all because there's probably so many, but you could basically assume that if you're making a change to your site, then you're invalidating the cache. And then from then on, the first person to hit the site will not hit the cache, which is not like, it's just one person one time. So it shouldn't be such a big deal either way. But it's just important to understand like what's going on behind the scenes. In situations where your page's data is updated frequently, such as when your code fetches data from an external collection, you can invalidate the cache using Wix Site Backend API. We'll take a look at that soon. And this ensures that visitors don't see outdated information on your site. I think the manual caching will also be related to that, but let's see here when to control or disable manual caching manually. Wix allows you to manage caching for your sites. This means that you can determine how often the refresh page caches, to refresh page caches or disable caching for a page entirely. So just to show you where that is, if I can remember by heart. So that is if we go to a specific page on the site, so let's say the home page, and we go to page settings, and let's see over here. So is it under advanced? So you might, oh, here, advanced settings. Okay, it's hiding over here in advanced settings, right over here. And I feel like possibly because my browser is zoomed in, so there's some stuff missing here on the bottom. Oh no, okay, so that's the end of it over here. So manually control caching for this page. So that's this button over here. And if we go ahead and toggle it on, then we have the option to control when we want to reset the page's cache. Okay, so now it's set to maximum time, but we can essentially decide how often we want this page to cache. So we can say, refresh every hour. So that means every hour the cache will be invalidated, and then when somebody goes and pings the site again, then they will get a cache miss. So it'll reload the data. And we can even go ahead and click here, never disable caching. So for example, let's see what will happen then once we disable caching. So I'm going to publish the site. And let's go and hit, so this is for the home page. Let's go back to the home page. And so I'm going to give the home page a refresh. And now we just published, so we should definitely have a cache miss. So here, interesting. So here we get this new property, which is cache none. So essentially, it's not even a hit or miss. We just completely disabled caching for this page. And theoretically, no matter how many times I load this page, then the cache is none, and it'll never use the cache, and it'll always take okay, now it took 1.9 seconds to load the page. So basically, you could probably see it's also noticeably slower. Basically, if we disable cache, then every user that visits the site, visits this page, will get that fresh data every time. So again, the upside being that the data is always up to date. So if this was a very data heavy page, then that might be useful, or data that needs to be up to date. And we'll see Wix's instructions in a moment for when to do manual caching and when not. But generally, if we need very fresh data all the time, then it would make sense to possibly invalidate the cache. But in most scenarios, I think the best practice would probably be to have some form of caching enabled. So let's go ahead back to about page caching and see when Wix recommends to manually cache and not manually cache. So Wix allows you to manage caching for your site pages. We just saw that. When managing page caching, it's important to consider how pages may appear differently to various site visitors. You should consider manually controlling page caching for pages that retrieve data from external sources, such as product availability from an inventory management system. Okay, so if you're connecting to, let's say, a third-party API or something like that. Pages that display frequently changing data, like exchange rates or stock market details. Okay, pages that yeah, so that's what I said earlier. Pages that customize the display of elements based on site visitors' geolocation, such as currency or time zone. So that's interesting because I doubt that, and I'm basing this over something that I saw in another part of the documentation. I don't remember exactly where, that it does, like, the caches are stored based on certain information. So I don't think what would happen is, let's say we had an element that displays the time in that person's location. And then somebody in New York loads the page, and then somebody in Tokyo loads the page. I don't think that the person in Tokyo would see the time in New York. I think that the caching does have some kind of, some kind of awareness of where the page, like some metadata regarding the request that's coming in, and it knows not to provide a cache that's probably irrelevant. But I'm not 100% sure. And also, the, the relationship between custom code and the caching, I think we're going to learn more about this as we read the articles, but I feel like it's a very nuanced topic, and you might not be able to understand it unless you really have insight into the caching mechanism. Because if we have Velo code on our page, so Wix does run the Velo code on the server as well. But okay, do they run that Velo code if there's a cache? I'm not sure. If they do run the Velo code when there's a cache, then technically any page with Velo code would have cache disabled. So if caching is available for pages with Velo code, then what is the relationship there? So does the cache include Velo code that might have run based on a data request that came in, like the example that I gave? So I mean, the time-based element would have to be using some Velo code. So if, like, the Velo code that is used to populate that element, does that run regardless of cache, or does that run in the first? I'm having a little trouble wrapping my head around it. If you have a lot of clarity, please leave a comment and try and explain it to me, because um, I would love to understand that a little better, and possibly we will through this document here. I mean, I've never experienced a discrepancy. Let's put it that way. Like, I've never experienced that, Velo code ran in a nonsensical way, or I was served a page with Velo code that kind of rendered as if it was cached by somebody else running the code. Like, that is not an experience that happened to me. So I'm curious how that relationship is established to prevent those kind of scenarios. But I go off on a tangent. And let's just read the last point here. Pages that automatically update the date or the time on a page to reflect real. Oh, That's what I just said. Okay. These types of pages requires Wix service to render the changes to provide the most current information. If automatic caching is enabled, visitors might initially see outdated content because the page is served from the cached version. So this is kind of the answer to my question, rather than being freshly generated. For example, if the code on your page, now I'm feeling a little silly because maybe I had a good question if they decided to answer it here in the docs. For example, if the code on your page fetches exchange rates from an external source and displays them in a text box elements, visitors may see outdated rates from the cached version before the new rates are fetched and rendered. This can cause a temporary flicker effect as the page data updates. Okay, so let me say what I understand from this and how it answers my question. So basically, as I said, Wix renders the page on the server, and then when it gets to you as well, the Velo code runs again. So essentially, Wix runs your Velo code on the server, and then it'll populate the page with data from that initial server run and cache it. So that means that whenever that page is called, it will render with whatever data came to the page when it was originally loaded, when the cache was created. Then when it gets to your device, client side, the Velo code runs again, and it will refresh the data. So you will, in the end of the day, the client will have the updated data from the client side code, but initially you might see kind of a flicker of the old data. So I can't really imagine a scenario, well, yeah, unless you have like data that's quite permanent. Let's say, I don't know, let's say you're doing like a real estate listing sites, and your listings don't change all that often. Like maybe you put in a new listing every week or month, or I don't know what. So in that case, even though the page is being populated with data, you don't really need to, like, even if you get data from a few days ago, it should always kind of look the same. So in that case, you might, caching might still be effective. But then if the code runs again on client side, then I'm not sure how useful the cache actually is. Like it's just to show like an initial display of the data for like a few milliseconds before the code runs on your client side. I guess it depends how long the code is taking. Anyway, we're bordering on philosophical questions here, but that's technically how it works. And this is just a summary, so I'll just skip over that. Note: code added to your site's masterpage.js file runs on every page of your site. This code can affect how each page is displayed and may cause incorrect content to be shown if a page is cached. If you need to, capital We, recommend, sorry, I'm nitpicking, recommend checking your masterpage.js file and only include code that must run on every page. Move other code to appropriate page files. Code added to your site's masterpage.js file runs on every page of your site. This code can affect how each page is displayed and may cause incorrect content to be showed if a page is cached. I'm having a little trouble wrapping my head around that one. I'm trying to imagine a scenario, like, because it's supposed to include code that is supposed to run on every page. So I guess if you include code that pertains to a specific page, yeah, so maybe if you have code that pertains to, let's say, elements that are not part of like a global element or the header or the footer, possibly that's what they're referring to. Note, my note is need to investigate effects of master page on caching more deeply and understand better. That's my note to self. So that's about page caching. The next article I think is about what we just demoed in terms of By the way, if I sound weird, I had a bit of a cold earlier this week, so that's probably why, or allergies or something. Um, and this is what we saw earlier in terms of invalidating the cache. And one thing that we can play with is invalidating the cache with code. So let's try this out because this looks interesting to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy over this code snippet over here. And what I'm going to do is important invalidate method invalidates cache for your whole site, not just the page where you run the code. Yeah. So in the meanwhile, we can try and think of reasons that you might want to do this with code. If you have any ideas, you can put them in the comments below. But let's see what this looks like practically. So I'm going to grab this code right over here, which I copied already 5 times. And we're ready to turn on dev mode. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to return, let me return caching to this page before I forget. So let's go over here to settings, and I'm going to turn off manually control caching for this page. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to publish the site. And it'll be interesting also to observe, how turning on dev mode affects caching. So let's go ahead and turn on dev mode. So before we do the invalidate cache thing, I'm going to go, so now dev mode is on. I'm going to publish my site. And let's just see if that has any effect on caching. I'm curious, because I remember hearing something about how dev mode affects caching, but let's see if that actually happens. So I'm going to go here, homepage, I'm going to give it a reload. So here we should miss the cache, that makes sense. And there definitely is a cache for the page because we didn't get the cache none. And I'm just going to reload here again, and we hit the cache. Okay, so it seems like turning on dev mode didn't do anything in terms of caching, so that's important to note. And let's go over here. I remember it might be that only on older sites, depending on when you created your site, that might be different. I'm trying to like regurgitate things that I heard in my conversation with Alon. There was something about caching and dev mode and old sites and new sites. So some combination of that information. And let's play around with invalidating the caching from the front end. So I'm going to go here to public backend and public. I'm going to add in a web module, and let's just call this, let's say, cache. And so just call this cache.web.js. And here I'm just going to paste the code from Wix. So right over here, just pasting that code snippet in there. And I'm going to grab this web method, go to my home page. I'm going to import the web method over here. So import invalidate cache from backend / cache .web. Yeah, I bought a new mic. I don't know. Let me know if you hear the difference. And this mic is like different because you have to speak it to it in a different way. So it's like very close to my face and in front of my keyboard. So like that's why I'm typing a little oddly, if you notice any difference. And what we'll do here is I'll use this learn more button. So I'll just not link to anything. And then what I'll do is I'll call this, let's say, invalidate cache button. And here inside of our code, I'll select the invalidate cache button. And we'll say dot on click. We will invalidate cache. And yeah, I mean, we don't really need a wait here because I'm not actually concerned about what the result is. Are we concerned about what the result is? Sure, let's see what the result is. So what I'll do here is I'll go and I'll put a nameless function in here as the callback function. And I'll say const, we'll need async over here. And I'll say const result equals to await invalidate cache. And then we'll do console.log result. Curious to see what happens when what comes back from that. Okay, and we could change this button. I'll just change the text to say invalidate. Invalidate. Just for, due diligence sake. Okay, so that looks good. Let's see what happens now. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to publish the site. And I'm going to go over here to the page. And let's go ahead and give it a refresh. So here we should have a cache miss, which is fine. And it's taking a long time to load now. Yeah, possibly because of code that we added to the page, which I'm going to look out for a tutorial about the effects of adding code and on site speed. It's going to come in the future. I still need to position myself around it, but it's something that I do want to talk about. And so let's just reload this again. So we got a cache hit now. So theoretically, our cache should be valid for a week. So let's go ahead and hit here, invalidate. I'm going to go and do a quick look at the console here. And we got back undefined. That was very anticlimactic, but let's go ahead and I'm going to refresh the page. And now we got a cache miss. Okay, so very simply, we invalidated the cache of our site using code. Again, not so sure exactly. I can't think of a scenario right now where we might want to do that. Maybe, I don't know, like if you have a page that you need to refresh the data on and you want to give users the ability to refresh, I don't know, to invalidate the cache. I'm trying to think of a real life scenario. If you can think of something, let me know. But if you wanted to do it for some reason, then that is how you would do it. And now that we understand kind of the basics of caching, we can dive a little deeper and talk about a few other topics like caching in web methods and caching with regard to data. Okay, so it's kind of more dev-specific caching. Let's start off with data caching in Wix data, so query results essentially. And this kind of highlights why in the examples that we saw about manual page caching, so you don't see anything here regarding to Wix data per se, but really just if you're receiving data from external sources, or yeah, I mean, this would also be an external source and other Velo customizations and whatnot, but they don't really address Wix data here. And that has to do with, most likely has to do with the fact that Wix data has a caching logic built into it that would kind of prevent it from ever being stale. Stale meaning that the cache doesn't reflect the actual data. And the reason for that, so let's read this and then we'll explain the reason. So data caching significantly speeds up data queries. We automatically cache the results of certain data queries to a content delivery network. When a visitor makes a query, those results are cached. Wix provides the cached results instead of querying the database again. So first of all, just to separate between these two caches. So the first cache that we were looking at until now, that's the page caches. So generally for the document, for the HTML, this is caching specifically for data queries. So this could even be technically a data query that happens once the user's on the page already. So the page is loaded, and then for some reason, let's say they click a button that does a data query, it'll automatically provide a cached result. We'll read all the exceptions below, which are quite a few. And this is something that's separate from the caching of a page. And okay, which data query results are cached? So the query does not make changes to the collection or any of the items it contains. So if you're getting data, then it shouldn't make any changes. But if you're doing something else like insert or remove, update, etc., then essentially you'll invalidate the cache. The queried collection is a native Wix data collection, so you're not using external collections. The query does not trigger any data hooks. The query is made by code that runs on the site front end, not back end. The request is made on behalf of a site visitor. I'm guessing that means versus member, because I'm not sure what other scenario there would be for requesting data if it's not done by a site visitor. The request does not contain personally identifiable information. It's a kind of data type inside of the collections. Eventual consistency is not overridden. I won't dive into that. It's a rather niche topic within data. And the collection does not have item visibility enabled. So you have the option within Wix to turn on this kind of, it's a quite helpful tool, I find, that you want to display or not display items on your site, like with a kind of easy Boolean switch, then that's item visibility. So as long as all these conditions are met, then the data is cached. Which results are not cached? So if the request modifies a collection, so essentially the opposite of this, data request is to a Wix app collection. So it's only for your CMS collections that you create. It's not for collections like Wix stores, bookings, etc. I'm not sure what a shared collection is. That might be interesting to learn later. The request triggers a data hook. Request is made by code backend on behalf of a site member. Okay, so it's pretty much just like a list of opposites. And it did clarify that point above that I wasn't so sure about. And so that's the place that the data cache is invalidated. And data cache invalidation. Cache invalidation allows new updated data to be cached and returned to the visitor in future queries. The cache is automatically cleared when a request makes changes, the site is published, results have been cached for 1 week or longer. To make the best out of Wix data's caching, avoid frequent or unnecessary cache invalidation, etc., etc. Cache invalidation. Okay, we're not going to read that right now. That's it. Okay, so basically, since Wix has very intense cache validation with regard to Wix data, even if basically they've created it in a way that it's very hard for you to get stale data from Wix data because pretty much any action you take with regard to Wix data will invalidate the cache. And once that cache is invalidated, then if I'm not mistaken, it'll probably also invalidate the cache of the page that has that data on it. I want to say, based on what we've read so far. So, yeah, so it would be very hard to get stale data in terms of Wix data. Okay, that's the 2 cents that I'm taking away from here. And if you have data that is being updated frequently, then you're probably not utilizing the caching aspect very much. Okay, so like basically it kind of disables the whole idea behind caching. The one way to circumvent this and possibly take back a little control here is the last topic that we're going to talk about, and that is the caching in the web methods, because web methods happen in the back end. And if you can control when the result of a web method is cached, and again, this is a rather new feature, so I'm going to be kind of learning it together with you in a moment, but if you theoretically, based on what I understand it to do, if you can have a cache for a backend request, then you have a lot more control over when things are cached and invalidated, and you won't necessarily need to follow these rules. Let's hop in and do a little demo, and then we can talk a little more theoretical talk after that. We've reached the climax of the tutorial, and we're going to be talking about caching in web methods. This is something that's rather new. If you're not familiar with the Wix backend, web methods, and whatnot, I have a bunch of tutorials on that topic. You can also check out the advanced Velo course, which is coming out in these weeks on Thursdays. And in the intro episodes, you can definitely learn a lot about the Wix backend and web methods and whatnot. So if you're feeling a little lost, You can go and check that out before watching this tutorial. But if you feel comfortable with web methods and you're just learning something new, then we're about to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a new web module. And I'm just going to call this here, let's say, test. I know, very original. And here, what we'll do is we can just preserve the original web method that we've been provided here. I'm just going to get rid of some of this explanation code over here. And we can actually just use this web method as is. So we have this out-of-the-box web method that's provided. And essentially, in order to add in caching, what we're going to do is we're going to add in another options parameter here after the function. Okay, so inside of our web method, we now have three things. So we have the permissions, we have the function itself, and here we're going to have the options pertaining to caching. And if we take a look here at the instructions, then you can see here that the cache needs to include two things. So it needs to include some tags, and it needs to include a TTL. And the tags are going to be for the purpose of invalidating that cache later on. And TTL is time to live. I wanted to say time to life, but I'm happy I read this. It's time to live in seconds. Notice that it's seconds because, yeah, often in JavaScript, times like this will be written in milliseconds. So it's important to note here that that is in seconds. And here, if you want to do it for 1 week, then that's 604,800 seconds, and that is the default. So if you don't have the time to live, then that will be the default for this cache. And what this cache is going to do essentially is it's going to store the results of this web method and return that to the user when they call this web method. So before we implement the cache, let's implement a web method. And here, essentially, we already have a web method, which is just multiplying two parameters that are passed in, so factor1 and factor2. And the only thing that I'm going to change here is that I'm going to add a timeout. So I'm going to make this take a little longer. Instead of returning factor1 times factor2, I'm going to add, let's say, set timeout. Whoops. Just like that. Oh no, it didn't do the automatic. I don't know how to write this myself. There we go. Okay, so set timeout. And then here, let's set a timeout of, let's say, 3 seconds. So this is in milliseconds. So let's do, let's say, 3 times 1,000. And then here, inside of the, we might have to do this as a promise to do this delay. Because if we return here, yeah. Okay, so let's design this. Let's design this as a promise. Let's say if I could see here, let's say const delay equals to await new promise. Oh man. And then here we're going to have, I don't think we need await here. I just put that in for no reason. So here we're going to have resolve and reject. And then we'll put our timeout in here. Let me just grab the timeout here. Yeah, because if we would just have the timeout like that plain in the function, it would probably, like the return would be inside the function that's inside the set timeout. It wouldn't be the return from our actual multiply web method. So that would be a problem. And then what we'll do here is we'll just, inside the timeout, we will resolve. So that means this delay essentially should be a promise that resolves after 3 seconds, if I did this right. So here what we'll do is we'll make this asynchronous. And then here we'll have await delay, which should take about 3 seconds. And no, okay, so this needs to be a function, I guess. Uh, sorry. There we go. Okay. I think that should do the trick. And don't get too caught up in this, because all I'm trying to do with this delay is simulate a scenario where the web method takes time. So, for example, if you have, let's say, you're fetching some data here, or you're doing like an intense calculation or something, for some reason your web method is a web method that might take a few seconds. So that's what I'm trying to simulate here. You don't have to know how to do this to do web method caching and whatnot. So if that was confusing to you and whatnot, just completely forget about it and just remember that we have a delay here of 3 seconds. And then we're going to return factor 1 times factor 2. So let's see what happens here. No cache. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to grab this multiply web method over here. And let's head back to our home page. And what I'll do here is I'm going to, for now, let's just comment out all this code that we have here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to import, I'm going to import our new web method of multiply. So I'm going to import here multiply from backend. Yeah, I need to figure out something with this mic. backend/test.web. And then we can go over here. And for our button, let's go ahead. I'm going to rename the button. So let's go over here. I'm going to change the text. Let's say this will be test. And let's change this over here. So this will be our test button. And what I'll do is I'll select our test button. Test button dot on click. And when we do that, we'll say const result equals to await multiply. And this needs to be async. And into the multiply function, we need to pass 2 parameters. So let's say we'll do 2 and 4. So it should return 2 times 4, it should return 8. And then what we'll do here is we'll do console.log result, and here we'll have the result. Okay, so let's see what happens now without any kind of caching on our web method. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to publish this. And then we're going to head over here. And remember, this has no relationship to the caching that we talked about for the pages and whatnot. So just forget about that for a second. And then here we can go here to our site. I'm going to open up the console. And let's just give our homepage a refresh. And okay, so let's go ahead and try this test button. So I'm going to go ahead and click test. And in about 2-3 seconds, so we get result 8. Okay, so that was without caching. And then if I click test again, then we need to wait another 3 seconds and get result 8. So then my delay seems to be working. So that's what's going on here. Now let's go ahead and implement our cache. So I'm going to go over here back to our editor. I'm going to head here into the cache. I'm going to head here into our test.web.js. And here I'm going to implement that cache that I mentioned earlier. So here inside the options, we should have a cache. And we're going to need to have 2 things. So we're going to have tags. And I'm just going to put tag test for now because it's not really our concern at the moment. And here we'll have our TTL. And let me put in, let's say, I don't know, 30. Yeah, because I don't really need this to last very long. I just want it to last for the demonstration. And who knows, we might even get in like a little demo of what happens once the cache is invalidated. So let's go over there. I put in that, and let's go ahead now and publish here on the live site. So I went ahead and I refreshed. So we're using the updated site. I'm going to go ahead and click test. And there we go. So we got result 8. That took about 3 seconds. And now let me just go ahead and click test again. And that came a lot quicker. Okay, so let me just hit test again. So the results are coming back a lot quicker than before. I'm gonna make the delay a little longer just so that it's like the difference is really exaggerated, so you can really see it. So let me go ahead and go back here. And I want to add another feature in addition to highlight another aspect of the caching. So let me go over here and I'm going to add in an input. Okay, so this input is going to be for numbers. And this is going to be, let's say, factor 1. And then over here, I'm going to add a variable. So console.log, const factor 1 is going to be our factor 1 element dot value. And that's what I'm going to pass in here to the multiply. So we're adding like a little bit of variability here. And inside of our test.web.js, I'm gonna make the delay a little longer. So let's make it, let's say, 5 seconds. I don't want to bore you, but I also want it to be very clear that the delay, that there wasn't any kind of delay. We could probably also set up. I used to remember how to do this in terms of timing here for the. Let's see if I could remember really quickly. Console dot time. Hmm. Console.time. Console.time. Let's try that. Time end maybe. I think that's how to do it. I don't remember by heart, but let's see. So let me go ahead and publish here. And we'll run the original test again just to make sure that it's really like obvious. And then we'll play around a little bit with changing our parameters and we'll see how that affects the caching. So going back here to the live site, I'm just going to go ahead and give that a refresh. And I'm sorry here that my input is like the only thing on the page that loaded on time. So, okay, so let's go ahead and hit that test button. So I'm going to go ahead and hit test. And yeah, it's taken a while now. Okay, there we go. So this took, so the result, okay, the result came back as 0, and that's because I didn't put anything here into my input. Okay, so that's my bad. So let me put, let's say, 4 into my input. I'm going to hit test, and this again won't hit the cache because this is a different input. So result 16, so it did 4 times 4, and it took about 5 seconds. Okay, so you could see that over here. And let me hit test again now, and now it took 1/10 of the time to do the same calculation. Okay, so essentially what happened is that we didn't ever hit this delay. So inside of our web method, instead of actually running this function, which would have hit the delay and waited 5 seconds and then returned our calculation, it just took our 2 parameters and it said, okay, you're giving me 4 and 4. I already know what the result is for that because I have it cached and I returned 4. Okay, so it didn't even have to run the function, so it came back a lot quicker. And if we go ahead and we change this, let's say to 5, okay, so input 5 instead of 4, and then I do the test again, so it will need to create a new cache for those 2 parameters. So that's why it took here again, it took 5 seconds almost. But if I go ahead and I hit test, then it comes back really quickly. And even if I switch this back to 4 now, and then I hit test again, we still get, we should still get the cached result. No, we did not get the cache result, which surprises me. I am surprised. I'm happy that we're doing this experiment because this is not what I expected. So I guess if the parameters change, then it will change, then it will invalidate the cache. Okay, we're going to read the docs in a second. This time we did the demo first and the doc second, so that might be part of the source of the confusion. Let me just test this one more time. I'm going to change it back to 5, and I'm going to hit test, and yeah, so it invalidates the cache. So this is not the behavior I was expecting and hoping for. I thought that essentially Wix would cache a result based on different parameters, and it would have a cached result for each set of parameters. And that way, even if your parameters changed, as long as there was a cached result for those parameters, then it would return the cached result. What it seems to be happening here is that it only returns the cached result if if the parameters match the previous request, which is not as useful as the other option. Let's go ahead. So let's take a pause from demoing things and actually go in and read a little bit about the background, and maybe it will be explained a little better, and maybe there's a way to overcome this that I'm kind of not paying attention to. I'm back, and this is not the documentation, as you can see, because as I was pausing the recording, something popped into my mind that it might be my fault. So yeah, it's crazy, right? So let me go here and explain why. Because I set the time to life to 30 seconds, which is rather short. So it could be that on all, like, for some reason, like the time that I was explaining things in between the different tests, that I was accidentally invalidating the cache. So I'm going to make this like much longer. Like, let's make, I don't know, a really long time. So that definitely is not the factor that it's affecting what's going on here. And I'm just going to publish this again, and we'll run the test. I'm not sure. We could still get the same results, but at least this time I'll be like a little more sure that it's the expected behavior and not something that has to do with how I set it up. So let me go back over here. I'm going to give this a refresh, which should invalidate all our caches anyways, I think. The publishing at least should. And let's go over here. So let me put in 5, and I'm going to hit test. And this will take about 5 seconds. Bear with me. There we go. So we got one result. I'm going to test again. We got the cached result. Amazing. So that's working. Let's put in 4 over here. I'm going to hit test. So this should not hit the cache because it's a new parameter. And there we go. So we didn't hit the cache. I'll test again. There we go. So now we have 4 cached. And if I flip back to 5 now and I hit test, we did get the cached result. Okay. So that was on me. That was my bad, but I'm happy it happened to me because then maybe it won't happen to you. And I'm happy it happened before I badmouth Wix too much. Okay, so yeah, so that was me, and it does work as expected, which is awesome. So basically, Wix caches the results per parameter. So if you got the results for one parameter already, even if you switch up parameters and you go back, then you should be good. So let me just try this. I have to try it like 1 or 2 more times just to be 100% sure. So I'm going to do test. Yeah, we got a cached result. Excellent. Switch this back to 5, test, and we keep on getting the cached results. Amazing. Okay, so I'm very glad now. I'm happy. I hope you are too. And to wrap up, let's just go. Should we talk about invalidating the cache? Yeah, so if you want to, I'm not going to demo this, but I'll just point you to where to look because it has to do a bit with what we talked about before. But essentially, if you want to invalidate the cache, so it's a combination of what we already learned. So it's using that same invalidate cache method. For some reason here, they're using elevate. I'm not sure why, basically to give like admin permissions. But essentially, if I'm not mistaken, it just utilizes, oh no, this is from Wix site backend. Sorry, scratch that. Okay, invalidating the cache, how will that work? So for example, yeah, so invalidate, how should we demo this? So I'm going to go over here. let me go ahead and I'm just going to copy the code that they have here to make this quick. So here we have this. We don't need this twice because we have this already. Okay, so essentially we're importing elevate and we're importing cache. And then what we're doing here is we are setting the invalidation methods, which are essentially the tags of what we want to invalidate. So if we go over here, I'm just going to put this over here. So let's comment this out for now. And we'll put this over here. So the invalidation methods are the tags of the web methods that you want to invalidate. So for example, here, this would be, let's say, test in our case, because that's what we set the tag to be. And the idea here being, I'm guessing, that you could tag multiple different web methods that you'd want to invalidate with similar tags and then invalidate like a couple web methods kind of in batch at once. And then essentially all you'd have to do is call this try catch over here and turn this into async. Yeah, so this is what invalidating would look like. And again, I'm much worse at figuring out when you'd want to invalidate than when you'd want to actually use cache. So if you guys think of any ideas for, when you might want to invalidate a certain web method, like a good kind of real life example, then then let me know. Like, I guess for this, I could probably think of one because it's a little more like if you have a web method that fetches certain data and then a user takes an action that's supposed to update that data, then you'd probably want to invalidate that cache. So that kind of makes sense. And that's something that you'd have to do yourself because Wix can't do this for you because it's a cache that's built into the web method that you build for your backend, so you have full control. So it's pretty awesome. And I'm kind of liking this. Like it definitely adds a layer of complication because you really need to think about when to invalidate caches and when not. But on the other hand, it could really have some speed benefits, especially if you have web methods that usually are getting the same data. Again, you'll want to think about where you want to implement this because, let's say you have a web method that generates stuff based on like a third-party API, for example, OpenAI. So you're supposed to generate an AI response based on some kind of user input. So that's a place where you're probably not going to want to cache because the result is always going to be different. And if you cache the results, that means that one user will get somebody else's response regardless of the input that they put, which would be really bad. But something that's more straightforward, like a calculation, like we did here, where the calculation is almost always going to be the same thing, then for the same inputs, then that makes a lot of sense. So that is caching. Do we even need to read the article here? Yeah, there's a whole article here, which, I think we covered most of it. So I'm gonna stop here. Also because my throat is full of phlegm, and I need to. Yeah, it's not fun to be sick, but I really did want to make this video because I think it's an important topic, and I also wanted to learn more about it and share a bit. So please let me know if you have any thoughts or questions or whatnot in the comments below. And if you like this video and you'd want to see more videos like this, then you can go ahead and give it a thumbs up. That's a good indicator to me that this was a good video. We want more. And if you don't want to miss videos like this every week, in addition to the videos of the advanced course, which are now coming out, then I'd recommend subscribing to the channel, and I will see you next time.
That's all for now. Thanks for watching. This tutorial may be over, but that doesn't mean that your journey has to end here. YouTube will have some recommendations up above in a moment for more videos, but don't get too distracted because my eyes are over here, and on the WixWiz website we have a lot more resources for you to continue learning or get support for your business or project. We've got a blog, beginner courses, and a community forum where you can vent about Velo or post some tough questions like, why does my header have a mind of its own? On the website, you can also find my personal calendar to schedule a one-on-one and details about getting ongoing assistance from our team of Wix experts. I'll catch you later, and don't forget that every big feature was once a small bug.